Well, I believe that in liberation theology we have, I would say, two central points. That is, two central intuitions and one concern. I think that the first intuition that has been from the beginning of liberation theology and continuing to be interesting and fruitful for us is the question of how to do theology. This is something classic in theology, but for us in liberation theology, from the beginning, we have thought about what does it mean to do theology. Therefore, we could essentially say the following answer. As a Christian revelation, God is a mystery. Theology is a language about God, a word about God. How do we talk then about a mystery? Not that the mystery is an enigma or a problem, but a reality that is beyond us, a huge reality. Therefore, what we believe is that to be able to talk about God, what is necessary is what we call in liberation theology the first act of theology. That is contemplation, prayer, and praxis. We contemplate God and we put His will into practice before we reflect on and talk about Him. The first moment can be seen as a moment of silence before God. In the case of prayer, this is very clear, but in the case of commitment, of solidarity with others, particularly with those most poor, it is also clear, in the sense that in the work of solidarity we are not always reflecting on God, but rather acting in the first instance, in the first act. Therefore, theology comes after this, as a reflection over the first moment of contemplation and praxis. It is the second moment. After silence comes talking. I would say that from this perspective, theology is a talking enriched by silence, a second act enriched by the first act. And the truth is, with the passing of time, I'm even more sure that this extension that we have insisted on in liberation theology is actually very classic. This is a first question, therefore a very important point. There is a second intuition that has also been present since the beginning of liberation theology, and that is the question of poverty. Therefore, also from the perspective of the poor, to do theology. Poverty is a reality that the Episcopal conferences in Medellin and Puebla called inhumane and anti-evangelical. It seems to me that poverty is ultimately death. Sometimes we talk about poverty as a socio-economic problem, and clearly it is. But it seems to me that poverty, as we live it there, and unfortunately in other parts of the world, I speak of Latin America because it is my continent, but I don't think it is only there that we have these things. Poverty means early death, unjust death for many, and in Latin America particularly for children. It seems to me also that death is when an indigenous language or a culture is despised. As the anthropologists say, culture is life. I believe that to destroy a culture is to give death. Poverty is death in this sense. Therefore, it's a global problem, a global human situation, where the socio-economic perspective is an important perspective, but not the only one. Now, I would also like to make this point about poverty. It is that the primary reason for the option for the poor doesn't come from the fact that we live in a world where poverty exists. For me as a Christian, the primary reason for what people come to me calling the preferential option for the poor comes from God, the God in whom I believe. When I'm outside Latin America and I talk about poverty, people in Europe and the United States say to me, sure, I understand that you talk about poverty because you come from Latin America. My answer is to tell them, please don't put me in a box. Because my main reason for talking about poverty is not because I live there, but because I believe in the God of Jesus Christ, that He is our God. The option for the poor is an option, using a difficult word, it is a theocentric option. That is, it is centered in God. The poor are loved preferentially by God, not because they are good, but because they are poor. Because they live in a condition that is contrary to His will. And this should be our attitude, a preference for the poor, not because they are better, more good, moral or religious than others, although that could also be true, but it is not the primary reason. It is because they are poor. This theme of poverty, with lots more reasons that I won't go into, I believe is also a central question. Now I said two intuitions and one concern. The concern is as follows. Our intention for doing theology, which is to do with the question of intentions, is to proclaim the gospel. We believe that theology is a reflection oriented towards the announcement of the gospel. And here it really makes sense. Theology is not just done so one can write books. It is done thinking about the task of the church. Because theology is an ecclesial task, that it is from inside the church to help her in her mission to announce the good news. I finish by saying the following. It seems to me that to announce the kingdom of God is to announce the kingdom of life. Abundant life, all of life, personal, social, spiritual, material. This is announcing the kingdom of God. Therefore, to us, it seems to me that the great question is how to announce the kingdom of life in a reality marked by death. This is our question. It seems simple, but this is our question. We can approach it in all sorts of ways. Another way to say that comes to me often is to say that the theology we have in liberation theology is an attempt to respond to the question of how to speak of God from the suffering of the innocent. But it is the same. How to talk of the God of Jesus Christ, the God of life, from the daily sufferings of the poor. Our theology tries to answer these questions. Questions that naturally are much greater than our capacity to answer them.